The southern tip of Africa had always been a place where time seemed to breathe through the mountains, the plains, and the endless coastline that curled around the continent like an ancient guardian. Long before any European ship drifted across the horizon, this land carried its own stories, stories held by the Khoisan hunters who followed the paths of game animals and tracked the movements of the wind, and by the Bantu-speaking communities who built thriving settlements across the valleys and grasslands. Life here unfolded without a central king or nation. Instead, it grew through countless tribes, families, languages, and rituals. Each community shaped its own way of living, its own laws, and its own understanding of the land that nourished them. For ages, the world beyond Africa's southern edge felt distant, unknown, and unnecessary. But in the 15th century, that silent boundary broke. Portuguese explorers pushed their ships down the coast of West Africa, not knowing what waited south of the equator. As they rounded the Cape in fierce storms, their presence marked the beginning of a new global age. Although the Portuguese never built a permanent colony in the region, their arrival connected South Africa to a rapidly expanding world. For the first time, the land stood on the edge of international trade routes, even if only as a waypoint for those chasing spices, wealth, and empires. More than a century later, in 1652, the rhythm of South Africa changed forever. A fleet of Dutch vessels arrived in Table Bay, carrying sailors, supplies, and a pragmatic man named Jan van Riebeeck. His mission was simple in its original intention: establish a small refreshment station for the Dutch East India Company, a safe harbor where ships could resupply with fresh food and water before continuing toward Asia. But what began as a modest outpost grew rapidly. The Dutch built houses, farms, vineyards, and fortifications. They planted wheat and grapes, set up trading posts, and, in time, brought enslaved workers from across Africa and Asia to cultivate the land. Their presence reshaped the relationship between humans and soil, between communities and power. The expansion of Dutch farms pushed the settlers further into the interior. Conflict rose between the newcomers and the indigenous Khoisan people, who were slowly displaced from their grazing lands and hunting territories. Some resisted, some adapted, some were absorbed into the new colony's labor system. South Africa was entering a period of transformation, one marked by both opportunity and profound turmoil. As the decades passed, the Dutch colony solidified its presence, but its future took a dramatic turn in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. Europe was changing. Wars and political upheavals rippled across the continent. In 1806, during the Napoleonic Wars, the British seized control of the Cape Colony from the Dutch, viewing it as a strategic naval base. Under British rule, new laws, new languages, and new priorities were introduced. The colony became part of a global empire whose ships, merchants, and soldiers spanned every ocean. The arrival of British authority set in motion a new wave of tensions. Many Dutch-speaking settlers, later known as Boers or Afrikaners, felt alienated by British rule. Their language, culture, and traditions seemed increasingly overshadowed by British governance. Seeking autonomy, thousands of these settlers embarked on what became known as the Great Trek, moving deep into the interior to form new communities far from British influence. These migrations led to the establishment of independent Boer republics, the South African Republic, Transvaal, and the Orange Free State. Meanwhile, the British strengthened their presence along the coast, particularly in Natal. African kingdoms, such as the mighty Zulu nation under leaders like Shaka Zulu, rose and fell during this turbulent period, shaping the landscape through both diplomacy and warfare. The interior of the region became a patchwork of competing interests, each fighting for land, control, and survival. Throughout the 19th century, South Africa was not a single country but a mosaic of territories. The Cape Colony and Natal were under British authority. The Orange Free State and Transvaal were independent Boer republics. African kingdoms controlled much of the land in between. Political borders shifted constantly as wars erupted, treaties were signed, and alliances formed and dissolved. Then came the discovery that changed everything: diamonds in the 1860s and gold in the 1880s. These incredible resources drew fortune seekers from across the world and intensified tensions between the British Empire and the Boer republics. Wealth created hunger. Hunger for control, for taxes, for political advantage. London saw the mines as vital to British economic power. The Boers wanted to defend their independence and their land. The conflicts escalated, eventually leading to the devastating Anglo-Boer War at the turn of the 20th century. The war left deep scars on the land and its people. British forces ultimately won, and the Boer republics were absorbed into the British Empire. But victory did not bring harmony. Instead, it created a political challenge: how to unify these deeply divided territories, British colonies, Boer regions, and diverse African populations, into a single system of governance. As the dust of war settled, leaders from the Cape Colony, Natal, Transvaal, and the Orange Free State began negotiating a political union. Their vision was to create a stable, centralized government that could manage the land's vast resources, address its complex social structure, and restore some sense of order after decades of conflict. Many voices were excluded from these negotiations, particularly those of the indigenous African majority, whose future would be shaped without their consent. Still, the process moved forward. By 1910, an agreement was reached. The four major territories were united under one flag, one parliament, and one national identity. On May 31, 1910, the Union of South Africa was officially born. For the first time in history, the region that had once been a scattering of tribes, kingdoms, colonies, and republics became a single political entity. The new nation stood as part of the British Empire, with its own prime minister and internal government. It was a monumental turning point, even though it was built on systems of inequality that would shape its society for generations. The decades that followed were marked by both progress and struggle. Railroads expanded, cities grew, industries flourished around the mines. But the political structure largely favored the white minority population and preserved divisions that had existed since the earliest colonial days. As global movements for independence and human rights swept across the 20th century, South Africa faced growing pressure to redefine itself. Finally, in 1961, after years of political debate and international tension, South Africa severed its final constitutional ties to the British Crown and declared itself a fully independent republic. The change symbolized a nation stepping into its own identity, even as it continued to wrestle with the legacy of its long, complicated past. From ancient peoples who walked the land freely, to explorers who reshaped global maps, to settlers who built farms and fought wars, to governments that rose and fell, the story of South Africa's formation is a tapestry woven from countless threads. It is a story of conflict and creation, of displacement and determination, of empires and resistance. And through every era, the land itself, its mountains, plains, and oceans, remained constant, holding the weight of history as the modern nation emerged